Hi everyone, welcome to 10 by 6, a sort of Dorset Eye production, a weekly overview of looking at different things that have occurred both locally, nationally, internationally. I'm Jason Crewland.
And I'm Tom Lane. Nice to see you all.
It's nice to see you, mate. Nice sunny day out here at last.
Yeah, it's fantastic out there, and really excited to be part of this new show. As you say, each week we'll be looking at local, national, international stories, have some invited guests to talk about particular topics, and I'm really looking forward to it. It should be really fun and interesting.
Fantastic, brilliant. Well, hopefully, as weeks go by, the viewers, readers of Dorset Eye will maybe let us know what they would like for us to cover. As this is the first week, it's down to you and me, mate. And we've started off with sort of a slightly alarming issue, is the raise or the decreasing numbers of racism that are taking place in the county, and increasing times that the police are actually identifying it as a causation behind criminal activity as part of, sort of race hate. So you can see here, for example, that we have lots of issues that are taking place, from the east of the county right through to, Weymouth more locally. And this is just in the last couple of weeks. The racially aggravated in Christchurch. A 9-year-old was attacked in a park in Bournemouth by a gang of kids, and multiple arrests that followed a racially aggravated assault in Weymouth, which involved local Weymouth people attacking a group of Brazilians. So it's worrying, isn't it, Tom? It's really worrying that we live in 2021 and these instances are so I don't know, commonplace. It used to be a little bit more unique, I think, didn't it, locally, but not so much.
Yeah, I think the last sort of 6 or 7 years, there's been an increase in both racism and racially motivated hate crime for all sorts of reasons. I mean, first of all, good to recognise that that these crimes are being recognised for what they are, as racially motivated attacks. Sometimes in the past they haven't been recognised by the police as such. So good that they're being recognised for what they are now. But obviously it'd be good to explore some of the reasons why there's been an increase over the last few years.
A lot of people sort of suggest that Brexit opened the can, and I think it's probably got some substance. But what other factors would you identify, sort of maybe locally and nationally, and even internationally, that are part of the causation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that some of the Brexit debate undoubtedly was racist and anti-immigrant. The idea that immigrants are taking our jobs, and some of the, of course, prior to the referendum, a lot of the tabloid newspaper front pages were covered with anti-immigrant hatefulness, essentially. And on top of that, we've got politicians both here and in America who regularly spout things which are essentially, racist and anti-immigrant. Johnson has done that. Trump obviously did that on a regular basis, and other politicians as well. And we have an environment, being created in this country that, where we talk about a hostile environment for people that are living and working here. It's quite extraordinary, really, that we would want to create a hostile environment for anybody, any human being, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, Brexit contributed to it. Undoubtedly, the billionaires' tabloid newspapers want to encourage people to have racist and anti-immigrant views for various reasons, and some of the leading politicians internationally have added to that problem.
I was very interested reading a couple of months ago, because I don't know if you're aware, but the Daily Mirror Group took over the Express, and they put in place a new editor. And the first thing the editor came out and said, I was really encouraged by him, saying, all of the refugee stories are going to go from our front pages. We're not going to now rely upon that sort of populist, xenophobic, racist perspective in order to attract people, which, you know, is encouraging. But it's still, you know, a drop in the ocean, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you're right. I mean, that's a positive step, at least. And the Express were the most guilty newspaper for having, you know, on a daily basis, anti-immigrant headlines. Of course, when Murdoch's News of the World ended after phone hacking scandals, which of course was quickly replaced by The Sun on Sunday. But anyway, the News of the World ended temporarily, if you like, and some journalists that were involved with the News of the World openly came out and said, yeah, you know, remember all those stories that used to be front page where we'd say, look at this immigrant family that are living in a £2 million house in Kensington and claiming 80 grand in benefits. Yeah, we just made that stuff up. We used to make that up, and it made the front page. And if we got caught out for making that stuff up, we published an apology about that big on page 38. Yeah. I am all for that notion. There's a bit of a campaign for it, for any newspaper that publishes a false story to publish the retraction, apology and fact on the same page and the same size as the original story. Why should that not be the case? I absolutely think that should be the case.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing that I think that we are now talking about it a lot more, because I think, you know, I just sort of start off this piece by sort of saying, you know, we seem to be seeing a lot more of it. Well, I think one of the reasons we're seeing a lot more of it is because less and less people are prepared to put up with it, and more legislation has been introduced to identify race hate as a crime, and by being a crime, it adds on more years or time to a sentence, which we know we have to encourage, which is a good thing. I mean, what would you say though in terms of the local issues in relation to these incidents to be identified? Can you think of any solutions, anything that we could be doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, you know, I always tend to think education for people of whatever age, of all ages, cradle to grave, education tends to be the answer to most of our problems and issues in society. The better educated people are, the more able they are to contribute to a positive society and make good decisions, and elect politicians that will act on behalf of the vast majority of our people, rather than a select few rich people. So and certainly with the issue of race and racism, I think young people are leading the way, and we've seen that in the last year with Black Lives Matter protests, involvement with young people in anti-racist groups, and anti-prejudice in other ways as well, tackling sexism, homophobia, etc. Young people are really leading the way, and I think saying to us older people that this world you've created that's based on greed, that's based on prejudice and discrimination, and not looking after the planet, we've had enough of that. This is destroying our planet, our societies and our futures. And we're not going to stand for that. And I think that's great to see young people really leading the way, you know, with anti-racism and other issues.
And it's still difficult, though, for some young people to confront the racist attitudes of their parents, for example. And if their parents do have racist attitudes, even if their parents aren't necessarily aware of their own attitudes, their own behavior, it still molds their children, doesn't it? It still molds the way their children think, it molds what their children say, and obviously their general behavior. So how, you know, just finishing off, how would you help to alleviate the parents of these attitudes, bearing in mind they are still playing a very significant part in the upbringing of their children?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question to answer. Again, I think, you know, education, I think the answers aren't simple, because the answers involve a massive change in society. They involve, you know, a change in the way that our politicians and our media report and present issues to do with race and immigration. I mean, in my opinion, what's happened and why we've seen an increase in racially motivated attacks is that we have a system of capitalism that's based on competition. Society is one big competition, and with modern day capitalism or late stage capitalism, what we're seeing is a tiny percentage of the population who are unbelievably obscenely wealthy doing really well, and the vast majority of the population actually doing worse and worse and worse, getting poorer and poorer and less access to services and the things they need to survive and thrive for their families. And that's what happens with late stage capitalism.
So it's scapegoating.
So the right wing politicians across the world who prop up this unfair system know that the vast majority of people, there'll come a point where the vast majority of people will say, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. It's not good for us. It's only good for a tiny amount of people that are obscenely rich. The rest of us are really suffering and not benefiting from this system. And they'll vote for something completely different. So to stay in power and to propagate this system, they have to create blame. They have to take away the blame from the capitalist system and from right-wing policies of government, and get people to believe that their economic and other problems are the fault of someone else. Benefit scroungers, immigrants, etc. And so they use, those tropes, racist and other tropes, to encourage people to blame other poor people, essentially, rather than people actually, recognizing where the blame should fall with our system and our policies that benefit a small number of rich people. Until we change that whole system, I can't see us, changing how things are very much.
First, what we need to finish off on this, but I think locally, I suppose the problem is to have people who are trapped in these situations, determined largely by economics and social, who can't really find a way out. And the problem you've described is so big and so historical and very much wrapped up in culture. But like you also pointed out, many young people are leading the way. So many young people are either rejecting their parents' racism, or they're confronting their parents' racism, or they're confronting the racism amongst their peers. And I guess that is how we need to move forward. Don't have this fear to challenge authority or your peers, because by challenging them and making them think is probably the only solution in the short term. Right, that's brilliant. We need to move on now, and we're going to move on to something that's been very, very dominant, shall we say, in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I say dominant only in the fact that it's dominant in the media. I don't think it's dominant per se, and that's Tory corruption, Conservative Party corruption, which has come out of nowhere really in the media, hasn't it? I mean, what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is newspapers and media organizations that generally, should we say, look the other way, or write up articles in using soft language when maybe harsh language is probably more justified, who've suddenly turned on Boris Johnson. They've suddenly turned on elements of the Conservative Party in a big way. I mean, Tom, can you just list some of the corruption and some of the scandals that in recent times, because it's phenomenal.
It is, and I mean, it's been evident even before the pandemic that what we have now is both of the main 2 political parties in the UK, Conservative and Labour, have shifted massively to the right over the last 2, 3, 4 years, and we have now a Conservative government who are no longer the more moderate one nation Conservatives of old. They got rid of all of those a couple of years ago. They were all kind of booted out of the Conservative Party. We have now the most right-wing government and particularly cabinet that we've ever seen. but also what we have is not a government that's employing traditional conservative policies and ideology. It seems to have shifted so that their ideology is mostly about nationalism and cronyism and corruption. It seems like, you know, the main thrust of what they do is to eke out as much public funds, as much money from government, from the economy as they can for themselves and their incredibly rich friends and donors. Of course, it goes round in a circle.
Can I just say, Tom, do you think though that they're using the support that they got from leavers, from Brexit voters, certainly in the short to medium term, to get away with this? Because you tend to find that, you know, the people who are celebrating the Conservative Party for bringing about what their Brexit are also prepared to turn a blind eye to literally anything at the moment the Conservative Party are doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I mean, I'm sure lots of our viewers are on various political groups on social media, and you know, are used to seeing Conservative supporters, including young Conservative supporters, who are kind of blind to it all and sort of say there isn't any corruption. And it's extraordinary. Of course, that's a little bit about the media that we're all exposed to. We're all exposed to different types of media. And we don't know what we don't know. And if you like, a friend of mine a couple of years ago said, we mustn't blame the lied to. We must blame the liars. You know, so I don't want to be accusatory or put down people that can support the Conservatives and aren't aware of corruption, because you don't know what you don't know. And we must blame the liars here. You know, the politicians and the billionaires media that are lying, and often lying by omission, lying by not informing people of what's really going on, rather than the people that are believing the lies, ordinary people that are being hoodwinked and lied to.
Can you just remind some of the readers, sorry, and some of the viewers, of what some of those scandals have been? Because
sure, I mean,
the list.
Yeah, I mean, just to list a few. I mean, obviously we had Jenrick, you know, with the
Robert Jenrick,
helping Robert Jenrick, helping you know, his friend, Tory donor to and housing developer to avoid a 40-odd million pound charge on a housing development. We've just in the last 2-3 weeks, we've obviously had the whole Cameron Greensill scandal, lobbying scandal. And that's involved not just Cameron, but obviously Rishi Sunak and Matt Hancock, who he was meeting with and texting with, to try and get a huge amount of public funds to prop up the failing Greensill Capital company that he worked for. We've had Matt Hancock suddenly be it's seemingly just awarded a certain amount of shares in his sister's company, and then it turns out his sister's company has just been awarded an NHS contract, so he stands to gain significantly financially, personally from that. And of course, we've had Johnson a whole litany of scandals just in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we've had the scandal about who paid for the extravagant refurbishment of the flat above number 11, where him and Carrie Simmons live, and the fact he seems not to have been telling the truth about who at least initially paid for that. It's likely to have been is it Lord Brownlow, a Tory donor? It's reported that that's quite likely. Anyway, and what else have we had with Boris Johnson? The other big one. Oh, whether he said about the thousands of bodies. Sorry, how could that slip my mind? Him making this comment about, you know, let the bodies pile high in their thousands before I'll have another lockdown. And of course, that's you know, that's based on a lot of incredibly rich people, influential, powerful people in the UK, America, and elsewhere, who fund the Conservatives, who fund Johnson, and who in the main funded Brexit.
But I think if I can just
putting pressure on.
If I can just come in there, though, Tom, I think what I find in this situation so extraordinary is that Boris Johnson is denying it, and yet so many people, it's not a surprise because he talks like that. You know, if you look at his Etonian Oxford background, but not just that, he's put on this great persona of looking like a bumbling idiot in order to be attractive to he perceives it to so many people. It's almost manufactured over years and years and years. So the fact now that 3 people were either in the cabinet or were close by when he made those remarks, who are now prepared to go on record to say that he said these things, and yet he continues to deny it. The reason he continues to deny it is because so much that he says is in front of largely Tory audiences that he gets paid to stand in front of. This is before he became a prime minister, that would all laugh and clap, having been downing bottles of Bollinger beforehand. Now he said it in a situation last October, which has now been revealed to the corporate billionaire media, and they have been prepared to go with it. So in this situation, it's not like, oh, that's just Boris Johnson. Now, for some reason, they decided that enough is enough. And I think they think that the bumbling idiot has had his time.
You may well be right, Jason. I mean, there's probably elements of the right-wing media that fancy someone else at the top now. Maybe Boris has done his job in finalising the Brexit deal, getting that over the line, and using his bumbling persona to somehow charm the electorate. But maybe they are looking for somebody a little more serious now in charge. And of course, elements of the right-wing media are connected with other Conservatives who may be interested in the top job. A particular example is obviously the Daily Mail and Sarah Vine, Michael Gove's wife.
And of course, Murdoch is very much behind Michael Gove too.
Yeah, they've always been very close. And Murdoch presented an award to Gove in America and was gushing in his presentation speech about Michael Gove. And there's rumours that that when Gove was Education Secretary and Cummings obviously was his underling working for him, that they were working closely with Murdoch. Murdoch was very interested in getting a piece of academisation of schools and looking to profit from that and have influence over our education system. God forbid. It may be that will return to haunt us at some point, especially if Gove becomes Prime Minister.
I think that's a really good point to stop, actually, because your comment there, this will come back to haunt us. I can see, unfortunately, this becoming a recurring theme. It's not the corruption, as I said before. I think the corruption is embedded now within our system. And the more embedded it becomes, unfortunately, sometimes the more desensitized a lot of people, are to things. But in essence, I think while the corporate billionaire media keep on bringing it to the fore, we can't avoid it. We can't ignore it. And the more it goes on, if you think about, for example, the end of Margaret Thatcher, it was a whole line of things. This crusading from poll tax and a whole number of other things over a number of months and years. Eventually, she went. And then if you look,
Jace, it was actually corruption that arguably brought an end to that 17-year period of Tory government.
Yes, it was.
They had a number of cabinet ministers, caught in huge corruption and sleaze scandals. A couple of them, Aitken and Archer, ended up in prison. So arguably it was corruption and sleaze that brought an end to that government, and it may well we may well see that happen again.
And John Major. I mean, Tony Blair came in on the back of, again, a whole number of sleaze, and obviously consequently we found out about his affair with Edwina Curry that had been going on for years, while he was telling us to go back to basics morality. So, I mean, I think, like you said, this is probably going to be something, unfortunately, that we're going to be looking at on a number of occasions on this programme. Let's move on to...
Before we end now, I did just want to say, I mean, it's been absolutely, two last very quick things. It's been absolutely abundantly clear in the last year, and more evidence is coming out now that pretty much the only thing this Conservative government have done well in terms of dealing with the pandemic is give vast sums of money, public money, our money, to their rich mates and donors, who then give some of it back again in donations to them as individuals and to the Tory party. Which is utterly corrupt, and there are more and more examples. The Good Law Project, for the viewers that aren't aware of it, Good Law Project thankfully, one of the few organisations, legal organisations, who are exposing this and actually holding the government to account, taking them to court to expose these corrupt, secretive contracts, deals that are made with their donors to give them vast sums of our money in an unaccountable way. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that I don't want our viewers to think that all we're going to do every week is be a Tory bashing thing, because I mean, I think it's appalling that Keir Starmer has decided not to sign a cross-party opposition letter to the Speaker of the House of Commons, which demands an investigation into the lies being told in the Commons, the lies of Boris Johnson. And Keir Starmer's refused to sign that letter. And Jace, you've recently been aware of a letter that Keir Starmer wrote that's now come out to the Prime Minister. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, again, you know, we're running over time on this one, but just it came out last week that he signed a letter when he became leader of the Labour Party to effectively work closely with the Conservative Party, and I think that raises so many questions about an official opposition. You can't be an official opposition if you're effectively just turning your head away when major issues, especially around COVID. I mean, we've got the worst death rate in the world. You know, there's a lot of publicity this week about India, which we're going to move on to in a moment. But a lot of publicity about India passing the 200,000 deaths. We had 130 to 150,000 officially who have died. We have a population of 70 million. They have a population of 1.2 billion. So, I mean, we are going to come on to this, I know. But you know, Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson and their parties are up to their neck in what has happened in this country in the last 12 to 15 months. Okay, let's guillotine it there. Let's move on to a local issue. And I think it's really something it's very important, I think, both in the east of the county and in the south of the county. And this is the Green New Deal, the investment that Green councillors and the Green Party are asking for in terms of promoting young people into a green economy, creating green jobs. And you know, you were talking, or you've talked to me in the past about, for example, you know, the way Biden is starting to really act upon his manifesto commitments in the States, and really progressive policies that are involving, you know, lots of young people fresh out of university to take those skills and to try and combat, you know, the CO2 emissions, to try and combat the melting glaciers. Because if we don't do it, and we don't do it really quickly, it may be too late. But if we don't make an effort, then we're going to fall over the precipice a lot quicker if we just carry on behaving as we have been. So it is you know, a really positive to see ideas and solutions being put forward, and for a lot of people to be saying yes. That really inspires me. And if we just we can just pull up yet again from Dorset Eye some of the articles that we've had in recent times, and this one is very recent. 22nd of April, a Green New Deal could create more than 11,600 green jobs in Dorset. You know, what better time in post-COVID to start talking about reinventing the economy? And I know that there was a survey done during, I think, the first lockdown, and it was amazing that the majority percentage of people had said they didn't want to go back to the society and the economy that we had before. So we have to be, you know, really pushing this out there to remind people in power that the public simply don't want it. Young people especially don't want to return to it. So it's really cool to see people like, you know, Chloe Sutcliffe, animal biology and conservation graduate, and we've got Mark Chivers, who's a project leader, who's Zero Carbon Dorset, who's both doing amazing jobs alongside many other people. in really pushing forward how we can create a much more sustainable economy. And please go to others. Please, our viewers go to Dorset Eye and read these articles for themselves. However, we also, as we're seeing, unfortunately, some of the policies that are being put forward for the way in which we get rid of some of our waste, and it doesn't necessarily fall in line. But this is the incinerator. Here we have Chapelgate, which is in Parley, in north of Bournemouth, but near Herne Airport, and it's also near an important site for Bournemouth University. Their argument is that obviously it poses real pollution issues, but not only that, but obviously heavy traffic threat to green belt areas, which are supposed to be protected. But the real positive, Tom, which, before I come back to you, is that Weymouth Council voted down and against the incinerator in the south of Dorset in Portland. And what, of course, they're asking people to do now in Bournemouth is to do the same thing, is to sign the petitions, put pressure on local MPs, and to make Bournemouth Council, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, excuse me, to completely rethink their policy, their strategy for waste. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer to say this, if you like, but it is a must now. The time for discussing whether climate change and the climate crisis is real has gone. There may be a few extreme right-wing politicians and fossil fuel companies that are still trying to argue that, but they're a joke. The time for prevarication and not taking huge, positive, urgent action to save the planet and the future of all life on Earth is now. The time has come now, and we can't wait 5 years. We can't wait 10 years. We've got to be acting now, and we've got to be acting in a way that's significant and large. We've got to do that to move away. In particular, there's lots and lots of ranges of measures that can be undertaken in different spheres of our society and economy and industry, but transport, etc. But obviously, we've got to massively move away very quickly from reliance on fossil fuels and towards a green economy, green initiatives, green jobs. And there are all sorts of innovations, and great to see, this study that was just highlighted in your article there, the study that suggests, 12,000 or so jobs can be created in innovative green technology across Dorset. Those studies are fabulous and need to be really embraced by politicians and people in the industrial sector to create those jobs and move forward. It's 50 years from now, we might look back and say, why weren't we doing that earlier? Why on earth weren't we doing that earlier? Because it solves two problems at the moment, partly because of the pandemic. We have two huge problems. We have an unemployment crisis, particularly in the young, and particularly in this country, particularly affecting Black and minority ethnic population who are disproportionately affected by the unemployment crisis. So, crisis of unemployment, and at the same time a climate crisis. And those two things can be solved by intelligent investment in green technologies and innovations, and a shift away from fossil fuel reliance. And we've got to do it now. So great to see, studies like this being put forward, politicians voting and pushing for a greener economy. And again, I think it's something certainly led by our young people. And things like, the decision not to go ahead with the incinerator on Portland. It's got to be said, that's people taking action. That's people power. That's all the people. Well done to all of you that did.
Yeah.
That filled in the survey and said no. This is crazy. It's completely against our views on tackling climate change. The pollution issues, the heavy traffic issues. It's not the answer to our problems. We have to create less waste, not decide to send it off to another country that are burdened with it, or decide to burn it in a way that will create pollution that our children will breathe. We've got to create less of it in the first place. and find creative solutions to deal with the waste we do create. So great to see young people and the public getting motivated to take action and to influence our politicians to make good decisions. And let's push on with a green economy. Let Dorset lead the way in that.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a fantastic phrase you did use there in terms of, the people power. We've seen people power now. Last week we saw it with the Super League in football, and all the time we are seeing people power in local communities that are influencing and changing the minds of authority figures and people in power. And yet I just don't feel that enough of it is being publicized. If we could publicize all of those policies that have been overturned because people have stood together and said no, and here's why we're saying no. And if we were given that information, I think so many more people as well would join. They feel more confident. But for some reason, the corporate billionaire media like to, be very selective in how they either report it or selective in how much they report. So maybe we can change that, Tom. You and I and many others, we can bring that to their attention a lot more through this program and many programs like this.
Well, let's hope so, Jason. And wasn't it extraordinary to see, a huge number of people, football supporters in the main, be absolutely up in arms, and rightly so, that a few unbelievably wealthy, mostly Americans, were looking to, in a greedy way, extract the most profit they possibly can from our game in a way which would destroy football as we know it in this country and be exceptionally bad for the fans. And they were up in arms about that and forced to change, which is great. And yet those same people perhaps are not able to translate that into how exactly that has been happening with fields like health and education, the care sector, how very wealthy people are now extracting as much wealth and profit from our daily lives, from our society, from public services, through a system of capitalism, in a way that isn't good for the consumer, isn't good for us as people.
And when you say things like that, Tom, when I hear other people say things like that, things like that on social media or in the public space, and then you get people go, "Oh, what a bunch of lefties." It's not about left or right for me. It's about, this is fact. And in terms of going back to the green issue, we are merely tenants on this planet. We're only here for decades, then we move away. So what we leave behind is in part down to us. Now, if we don't do anything, if we see all this outrageous behavior going on around us in terms of corruption and profiteering, etc., which then leads to massive dramatic effect on biodiversity, we are complicit, because future generations future generations can't dig us up and make us pay or make us answerable for what we've done. But that doesn't change the fact that we are answerable for what we've done and what we did. So I think we have a duty to make sure that the communities, the society, the counties, the countries, etc., that we are proud of what we leave behind when our tenancy is up, so to speak. And I'm sure, and I know that a lot of people in the community who want us to be talking, especially on Dorset Eye, they want to be, providing us with content a lot more about climate change and biodiversity, because they say it has to be right at the forefront of people's consciousness. And the more it's at the forefront of people's consciousness, the more that they'll become aware of, and the more that they'll do.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Jason. We have a duty, all of us. We have a duty, a responsibility to retain a habitable planet for our grandchildren, for the human race, and for all life on Earth. For there's record numbers, millions of species of animals becoming extinct now because of the climate crisis and change, and our exploitation of the natural environment, things like deforestation. I mean, we're killing off thousands of species on a weekly basis. we have a responsibility to be different, and if not, our grandchildren will never forgive us. So yes, I think Arundhati Roy said that beautiful thing. I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, another world is possible. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. It's just a beautiful thing, a beautiful idea. Another world, another planet that protects and preserves all life on Earth and meets our needs in a responsible way is absolutely possible within our grasp if we eliminate greed. We eliminate, the need for a small number of people to make vast profits. There's more than enough resources in the world for the population of the world. Even though the population's large, there's more than enough resources, more than enough space, more than enough food and the ability to grow it, water, etc. But we have to move away from a system of greed that's killing the planet. We really do.
And Arundhati Roy is a fantastic link onto our next topic, which is the situation in India, and the awful experiences that they're now having. And I think with COVID, obviously, and I think it stands out more, doesn't it? We're more aware of it because the situation here has dramatically declined, what with vaccines and people social distancing and wearing masks or whatever. A lot of people behaving in a way in which we're now seriously able to control COVID and make it now, much more manageable, minuscule compared to what it was in the UK, say 6 months ago, whatever. Whereas, so we can now look out somewhere else and we can notice how, the tragedy of what's taking place in their society. And how do you perceive it, Tom, in terms of, one, what they're experiencing, but two, what can the world do to help?
Yeah.
What should the world do to help?
I mean, what's unfolding in India is clearly a humanitarian tragedy of epic proportions. I think the numbers that have been officially reported by the Indian government are undoubtedly way less than the reality. There's a complete lack of testing and recording of deaths across the country, particularly in rural areas. And in Arundhati Roy's extraordinary, utterly heartbreaking article in The Guardian, she suggests that the actual death toll could be as much as 30 times. That would mean 10 million people may have died across India already, and they may be sometimes 6 to 8 weeks away from any sort of peak. So we're going to see daily, weekly death tolls that are just unforgivable, really. And I say unforgivable because what we're seeing across the world is the result of political choices and other factors like lack of access to healthcare, privatized healthcare systems, which India's mostly is, which Roy alludes to in her article, and extreme poverty, which contributes to these things. But it's fascinating to note that and it's really quite extraordinary how the pandemic, I kind of feel like the pandemic has shown the whole world a message about how our political leaders should and shouldn't act. And 4 of the top 5 death tolls in the world are places where very, very right-wing leaders have been elected. We had Trump in America, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Johnson in Britain, Modi in India. They're 4 of the 5 world's worst death rates, countries with the world's worst death rates. And countries right at the other end of the scale that have managed the pandemic extremely well, followed scientists, followed public health procedures for dealing with pandemics, and cared about people ahead of profits. Some of the Scandinavian countries, obviously New Zealand with Jacinda Ardern, where left-wing leaders have been elected. And it's just this extraordinary example the pandemic has given us of how right-wing politics is about profit over people and profit over lives, and left-wing politics is about what's good for people ahead of profit. And it's been extraordinary, really. Going back to India, I mean, it's just a horrific situation. It's good to hear that we're already committed to sending some aid. I hope, obviously, that countries across the world will join us in helping India, and of course, all across the world where the pandemic is bad and new variants emerge, that can come back and bite us as a country. So we mustn't be insular. We can't be. We have to view this as a global problem and a cooperative issue that governments across the world coordinate and help each other to tackle this issue.
Yeah. No, I'm just sort of listening to you and taking it all in. I haven't read the Arundhati Roy's article in the Guardian, and those figures are, well, it's just just mind blowing in the nature of what those people must be experiencing. I mean, dying on the pavement because they haven't got the oxygen, literally dying on the pavement. But unfortunately, for a country like India, it's probably something that's more common, much more common than it should be than maybe Western countries, because we haven't, as we talk about this globalized society, but we haven't become an integrated planet, have we? If we were an integrated planet, we would be looking out for each other. It wouldn't matter what country you're from, our empathy levels wouldn't be different. But unfortunately, we become fractionalized. So it's like India is thousands of miles away. India is over there. But what we should be doing, and I think an MP actually made this point in the Commons yesterday, he said, if we have 3 times more vaccines than we need, then we need to be sending those vaccines to India. If we no longer need those ventilators, we should be sending them to India. We shouldn't be umming and ahhing, because one person's life is no more valuable than another person's life, and it doesn't matter whereabouts in the planet they are. And India at this point in time can be a classic example of how we can all unite and come together and create this integrated planet where wherever the need happens to be, we respond as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's extraordinary to note that India is one of the world's largest producers of pharmaceuticals, but also the COVID vaccines, and yet not able to provide them to their people. In Roy's article, it talks about how there's now a growing black market in oxygen tanks. Just a horrific notion. And that the rich and powerful are managing to pay fortunes for access to oxygen or access to a hospital bed or a doctor. And of course, the poor people aren't allowed that access. I wonder at what, years ago, I wondered at what point do we recognise that a capitalist system is killing us all. I have this thing that says capitalism. Eventually, capitalism kills everything. First, democracy and the truth, then people and a habitable planet. And all 4 of those things are happening now. And I think I used to think, at the point that oxygen and water are for sale, are commodities for sale, that's when maybe we'll realise that capitalism isn't the best system to sustain human life. Well, we now have oxygen for sale. And water has just been floated on the stock market in America. And of course, share prices rise when a commodity is scarce. So it's in the interests of shareholders and rich, powerful businesses, including companies like Nestle, to make water a scarcity so that they make more profit from their shares. What an awful situation we've got ourselves in as a human race.
Yeah, and just to finish off as well, unfortunately, India has become a factory-based power base for the West. So it's, the plastic, the pharmaceuticals, and many other aspects of our day-to-day existence are constructed and created at very low cost or relatively low cost in India, and then brought over to the West, to the playground, to the luxury houses, for people to experience. Whereas you have 1.2 billion people living in India. Next door, you have 1.2 billion people living in China. You have between a quarter and a third of the whole population, the planet's population. And ultimately, they are creating for us to live in this relative luxury just a few thousand miles away. And it's tragic and it's so sad. And there's so much we can do about it. Well,
before we move on,
yeah, sorry.
Before we move on, Jace, could I just say a quick thing about foreign aid? Because we wanted just to give a mention to that. Obviously, we've just taken a decision to cut our foreign aid budget, which obviously, in my mind, is very mean and insular. But there are a couple of things I wanted to mention on that. One is that people tend to view foreign aid as handouts for poorer countries. And when times are tough in our own country, people tend to be persuaded to say things like, well, we need to look after our own first, and you know, and not give, they view it as handouts and not give these handouts. This is what the cut of foreign aid actually means. It's not handouts. It means what we're doing now is implementing an 80% cut to water and sanitation projects around the world during a global pandemic. It means a 95% cut to polio eradication that we were helping to fund, and a 50% cut to Yemen, a country that's suffering from bombing and bombardment of weapons from Saudi Arabia supplied by us, including school buses being targeted for being blown up. And we're cutting aid to the Yemen, suffering a terrible humanitarian disaster themselves for several years. We're cutting our aid there by 50%. So it's not handouts. Those are programs that really help people and eradicate illness, disease, poverty, and that we're cutting now. And also, I read a fascinating article years ago that said about how foreign aid actually helps to prevent countries around the world from falling into dictatorships and having military coups and oppressive military leaders who might then want to go to war with us. And the article said, if you take our top military experts and ask them if we should cut foreign aid, they would all say absolutely not, for security reasons. It helps to create security around the world, which helps with our own country's security. So foreign aid isn't exactly what the Mail and Express make it out to be.
No, and to finish off, the sad thing is, ironically as well, the very people who shout and scream about us cutting the need to cut foreign aid are also the ones who are promoting and saluting the amount of arms that we sell to these countries. So you mentioned Yemen. You know, we create this outrageous genocidal situation on the one hand, but you know, people who are saying no to foreign aid are supporting that because they're saying, oh, it brings in money to this country. And yet, I very much doubt in many of the cases of these people who celebrate it will actually see any of that money. The fact that it's morally unjustified and morally repugnant is almost a side issue here, because if they're arguing that it brings in money to this country, where's that money going? Because it's not coming to us. Okay, thank you, Tom. Well, hopefully the situation in India, as you say, the peak is probably not going to be for 4 to 6 weeks, but hopefully, you know, we can do something, and the American population in Europe can do something, and Australasia can do something to help alleviate the suffering of there's so many people. Yeah. Next thing I want to move on to, I'm coming towards the end of the show, but the next thing I want to move on to is something that happened last weekend, which is known as the, I don't know if you've heard this before, but the Kinder Scout Free to Roam. I mean, 89 years ago, a group of people went on to Kinder Scout, which is a moorland plateau and nature reserve in the Peak District in Derbyshire. And they went on there at the time to argue that this land is our land, and that it shouldn't be about large landowners who gained land through inheritance over centuries, dating back to, you know, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, to determine how 90% of the country can either be open, accessible, or not accessible to the population of that country. So locally in Dorset, a whole group of people, a whole group of organisations locally went over to the Richard Drax estate. As we know, the Richard Drax estate is the largest estate in Dorset. And I interviewed Emma Smart earlier in the week, and I'll play that interview now. And she tells us all about why they went onto Richard Drax's land, what their experience was, and what they think they gained from the situation. So here's the interview I did with Emma earlier in the week. Hi, I am Emma Smart from Extinction Rebellion. Welcome.
Hello, thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We're talking today about an incident that took place on Saturday, 24th of April, when you went onto the Drax estate for some illegal trespass, or maybe not so illegal trespass. Can you talk us through how all that came about?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, trespass is a civil offence. It's not a criminal offence at all. So this is an action that's been in the planning for a while. It's a collaboration between Extinction Rebellion and the Right to Roam campaign. We chose this date specifically because it's the 89th anniversary of the Kinder Scout mass trespass. Back in 1932, 400 men and women peacefully protested in Derbyshire on Kinder Scout to basically for greater public access to the countryside. And it's sort of like in recognition of this ancestral protest that protests are happening across the whole of the UK today, not just here in Dorset. So that was our sort of motivation behind it. But it's such an important issue. Land ownership is extremely unfair in the UK. In England, well, in the UK, I think it's half of the land is owned by less than 1% of the population. And in terms of access, in England, we're denied access to 92% of land and 97% of rivers. And this is so relevant today. We've just come out of a pandemic where we're being told being outdoors and in nature is so good for our physical well-being and our mental well-being, yet so many of us can't reach those 8% pocket land where we're allowed access. And so what we're asking for today is greater access. Our access to nature is a birthright. You know, it shouldn't be a criminal offence. And these landowners have a huge responsibility also. Land ownership really is at the heart of the ecological and the climate crisis. So we're also trying to raise awareness about that. So in terms of what we did today, if you like the logistics of it, we went out in groups of no more than 6 because obviously we're still in COVID. We chose Richard Drax because he is the single biggest landowner in Dorset. He owns 13,870 acres of land. That's equivalent to about 7,800 football pitches. It's huge. So that's why we chose, you know, we're not about targeting small landowners or farmers. We really want to be getting this message through to the biggest landowners in England. So we went out, we trespassed on land that's owned by Drax. We repurposed no trespassing and private property signs with everybody welcome signs, and also a letter to the landowners just asking for access. It's as simple as that. In an ecological emergency, we need to connect and understand nature in order to protect it. But how can we do that? You know, our children are denied access. How can we instill in them a desire to protect nature when they can't even go there?
Absolutely. And did you come across Richard Drax while you were there?
Richard Drax himself came out actually. A few of our group bumped into him. There was a huge police response, considering what we were doing was peaceful protest, and again, trespass is just a civil matter.
Yeah.
It certainly didn't require the 2 marked cars, the riot van, 2 unmarked police vehicles, at least 6 officers, and a police helicopter were called to the scene. Quite disproportionate response, and maybe, you know, just showing the influence that these elite large landowners may have. So yeah, I think a few more issues were raised than we expected today.
And what was Richard Drax's response? Was it positive, negative?
Well, the 3 guys who bumped into him tried to engage with him, and that's what we want to do. We want to have a conversation. We want to start this dialogue with landowners, you know. And so they tried to engage in him, but he wasn't interested to talk to them. He didn't want to have a conversation, and he basically called them brainless. You know, that people without brains would know not to come on my land, or something like that. So they gave up. They were told to leave, and all of the protesters today, when they were told to leave, they left peacefully. They left no trace at all. This was a peaceful demonstration. We were bird watching. I myself did some bird watching, like we read some poetry, picked up a bit of litter on the way. So not just leave no trace, but actually a positive trace. Yes. You know, we're not all about traipsing over the countryside and damaging. We had a really strict code of conduct in terms of our trespass today. We didn't take dogs with us. We didn't disturb livestock. We're aware that ground nesting birds are around at this time of year. So, you know, I think the public need to be trusted a little bit more. And if we're allowed access, then we will understand and respect both the land and those who work on it.
Do you think there's an issue, though, that whereas yourself, Emma, are very much aware of, for example, ground nesting birds, etc., that might not be the issue for the public more generally?
Yeah, possibly. And I think a lot more needs to be done to raise awareness of that. I mean, in Scotland, they have a right to roam policy, and both landowners and the government work together, and the public, and they follow an access code. And that's worked really well in Scotland. So I think you've got to trust and respect the public also, and educate them. And until they're part of the land and feel like they're welcome, you know, that's where the respect starts to become mutual between landowners and members of the public. So it doesn't have to be a negative experience.
And how about the general tone of the police response? I mean, you obviously talked about the helicopter and the riot van, etc. But in terms of their interaction, was that fairly passive, or was it not so?
Yeah. I mean, the police are aware that it's not a criminal matter. I mean, they certainly weren't called because damage was being done, or there was intimidation or threats or anything like that. These people were simply walking, taking photographs, and when asked to do so, they left. I think at a time when the police are struggling with resources, this was like a massive misuse of them. In this instance, there was no reason for nobody went up to the house or in the garden or anything like this. I mean, let's bear in mind just how big Richard Drax's land is. This wasn't a threatening situation anyway, and we would never want that to be the situation. So completely disproportionate, waste of resources, and yeah, some questions need to be asked really about that response, I think.
And in terms of what you initially hoped to achieve, do you think that you did? Do you believe that you did?
I think so. I mean, we repurposed a lot of signs. We left a letter for Richard to explain why we were there, and we've invited him to have that conversation with us. A lot of people from Weymouth and Dorchester and Wareham, you know, they spent real beautiful time in nature today. Like, spring is lovely, and these woodlands and these areas are really gorgeous. So, and people are sharing the photos on social media and really raising that awareness. Trespass at the moment is a civil matter, but the new police courts and sentencing bill is aiming to make trespass a criminal offence. And actually, Richard Drax was one of the first MPs back in 2018 to write a letter requesting this. If trespass is criminalised, so many of us who don't realise it are going to be affected. You know, ramblers, people going out for a wild swim or to camp, or to, you know, some of these HS2 tree protesters. It's going to be illegal. They'll be facing fines. And some of our most marginalised communities, Gypsy, Roma, travelling communities, are all affected by this trespass element of the bill. So I think today has really been a great opportunity and successful in raising awareness about this. You know, these issues aren't known by the wider public, and sometimes these bills and these law changes are sneaked through Parliament. So I think we've done a good job of raising awareness about that today.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for coming on 10 by 6. Been great to have your company. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was wonderful, interviewing Emma Smart earlier in the week. I mean, the whole way in which they approached going on to Richard Drax's land, it was not about causing confrontation. It was just about making that right to roam point. And I think, you know, as many people have said since last Saturday, the response by the police is entirely disproportionate. And you wouldn't get that for anybody else. But you get it for someone like Richard Drax. But that's besides the point. The point being is that they celebrated the 89th anniversary, and they hopefully at least have raised some much more understanding of the amount of land that's owned by such a small number of people. Hey, let's finish off on a really positive note, which is the No Mow May, which is, just very, very briefly, just finish off the programme. It's about us not mowing our lawns during May, to encourage insects, to encourage birds, to encourage biodiversity. During springtime, when things are flourishing, plants are coming out, animals and insects are starting to thrive. Going back to what we talked about earlier in the programme, we can do our bit. And we can do our bit by just even these little things. I know it's nice to look out on your garden, you've freshly mowed, and it's nice and tidy, but we're actually, I know it's quite, you know, crude here, but we're actually devastating biodiversity every time we turn our mowers on. But it's not about not mowing for the whole summer or whatever. It's just about saying, May, we're not going to do it for May. Just like, you know, people don't shave their moustaches in November for, you know, cancer, alleviating prostate cancer. We can do the same here in May, and encouraging, you know, the butterflies, the ladybirds, everything, even worms. You know, they're such an important part of our day-to-day biodiversity experience.
Yeah. To be fair, Jace, I might extend it into June and July. Imagine these conversations up and down the country with couples, you know, couples saying, "Any time you mowed the lawn," and the other person responding, you know, "Look, do you want me to mow the lawn, or do you want a habitable planet for our grandchildren?"
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, a great initiative, and we're seeing this up and down the country, rewilding initiatives, councils as well as ordinary people, you know, taking on these new initiatives about rewilding, about not always cutting and trimming down grassy areas, and encouraging birds and bees, butterflies, wasps, and all sorts of insects and animals on whom our life depends.
Absolutely.
You know, and particularly the birds and the bees in terms of pollination. Ultimately, they pollinate our crops, which feed us. So around the world, the destruction of the bee population is a very, very serious issue for humanity, and we've got to protect, you know, the bees and wasps and other forms of wildlife. So a great initiative, and it's nice to see lots of local people embracing it, and also starting, you know, their own sort of green initiatives, growing their own food organically and so forth, and creating, you know, nice areas. Even in town centres, they're creating sort of green areas and urban you know,
projects
where people grow their own food and so forth, which is, yeah, it's great to see. Great to see.
Brilliant.
It's just a thing. There's a thing also, just to say also about, you know, we've got to also move away from the use of glyphosate, from chemicals, which yes may help agriculture, big agriculture, to create food quicker and faster and more profitably. But ultimately, you know, glyphosates have been found in court in America to cause cancer. You know, and things like weed killer actually found in court to cause cancer. And it's quite extraordinary that, you know, Monsanto, that are the biggest producers of glyphosate, weed killers, both for commercial and agricultural and sort of home use. They were bought by Bayer, a German company, a few years ago. And one of the things that Bayer does is produce cancer drugs. So now the company that produces cancer drugs also makes the weed killer that can give us cancer. Yet another example of the ludicrousy of capitalism.
Yeah.
But yeah, a great initiative. So come on, everyone. No Mow May and maybe June and July too.
Too right. And a great place to finish. And thanks to all our viewers for tuning in to the first episode. And we'll be back next week with either 6 of our own or topics chosen by the readers. And they can get in contact just by contacting Dorset Eye. Just click on the contact and let us know. And please follow our YouTube channel and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on social media, etc. So we'll hopefully see you next week. Thanks to you, Tom.
Jace, you have a little funny to finish. You're very welcome. Lovely to chat to you, and hope people have enjoyed our discussion. I think you have a little funny to end with, do you not?
I think we'll save that till next week because we've gone slightly over.
Okay.
We'll save it till next week, and
okay. Well, we've got a treat for people for next week then.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you can see it anyway. But yeah, we'll have it there next week. You have a good week, Tom. You take care.
Thank you. Take care. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Cheers. Take care. Bye. Bye all.